What's up? Welcome in to the latest episode of Pot Like a Champion, the blueandgold.com recruiting podcast. I'm Patrick Engel, joined as always by our recruiting insider at blueandgold.com, Mike Singer. It's Tuesday, July 6th, 2021. Thanks to all of you who are right now watching us live on YouTube. And I don't say this to pat myself on the back, but more so to illustrate how much of a busy, really couple of weeks it's been and pivotal for where Notre Dame's class goes. I think it was last episode and then before this, Mike, I told you off air that I thought there'd be 8 decisions from guys who were scheduled to or did visit Notre Dame in June, starting from when Junior Tui Halamaka committed on June 19th up until July 4th. And there were. It was exactly 8, 4 of them to Notre Dame, 4 of them elsewhere. We'll probably touch on the ones that happened later, or the later ones of those in this show. But yeah, Mike, they keep keeping you busy.
Yeah, I want to say I put the over-under, and maybe I said by the end of June. I want to say I said by the end of July. I think it was 7.5 commitments for Notre Dame. Does that sound right to you?
Maybe. I think so.
Yeah, that sounds close enough, and I think it's at 6 right now. Maybe.
Seems within reach still.
Yeah, I absolutely think
knows?
so. I think. I mean, we'll wait till those questions pour in our live chat here, but yeah, I think new commitments certainly could happen for Notre Dame this month for sure. So certainly some exciting times around the corner.
And yeah, like you mentioned, a busy weekend for Notre Dame, getting a couple of commitments, some other targets heading elsewhere. We'll touch on a lot of those, some good news, some less than good news. But first, I want to make sure you guys are subscribed to the podcast. If you were listening to the podcast on Apple or Spotify, if you're watching us on YouTube, either live or playing this back, if you could hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button. And for you podcast listeners, please, if you'd be so kind, leave us a rating, leave us a review, leave us 5 stars and nice comments if you like what you hear. And you can follow us on Twitter. Follow me at Patrick Engel _ and follow Mike at Rivals _ Singer. So, Mike, why don't we start with the good news, I guess, and Notre Dame getting 2 defensive back commitments, 3-star Jaden Bellamy out of New Jersey, 4-star Devin Moore, cornerback out of Florida. If I'm not mistaken, you've seen both of them play in person, and now they're a part of Notre Dame's class. So what made both of them end up at Notre Dame? I know you had future casts in there for both, I believe. And what do you see Notre Dame getting in them and where this defensive back class stands now?
Yes. To start with Jaden Bellamy, I think this was a really nice get for Notre Dame. Someone that the staff had been going after for a while. You know, when Chris O'Leary got the job, safeties coach at Notre Dame, I want to say Bellamy was the first or second offer that he dished out. So someone that he liked really early on. Bellamy had a really nice junior season on both sides of the ball at Bergen Catholic. Of course, he is Bellamy's teammates with Notre Dame QB commit Steve Angeli. So nice player, versatile, great athlete, really high upside. Some folks I talked to on the Notre Dame side of things feel like this kid's just got that it factor to him that he's going to be a stud. I think the biggest thing that doesn't go in Bellamy's favor is his size. He's 5'11", 175 pounds. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just if he were 6'2", I think we're looking at a 5-star caliber player with his athleticism. So nothing he can do about that. 5'11", there's nothing wrong with that as a cornerback. I think he can play to the field. I wouldn't rule out, with just kind of this dog in him that he has, I could see him playing boundary down the road in his career. I think he can play safety and do it very well. So a lot to like with Jaden Bellamy. Notre Dame beat out Penn State for Bellamy. So yes, folks, Notre Dame is beating out Penn State in the recruiting process. I know Penn State got a win over the Fighting Irish today on the recruiting front, but Notre Dame beat out the Nittany Lions for Jaden Bellamy. And then the other one, this is just a monster one for Notre Dame. Bellamy's big one. I think you can make an argument that Moore was even bigger for Notre Dame. Irish were originally recruiting him as a safety back when Terry Joseph was still at Notre Dame. Mike Mickens, wasn't super involved in that recruitment until Marcus Freeman came in. They started recruiting him as a corner. and staff did a really nice job there. It always seemed like the Florida schools were going to get him, like he was kind of destined to stay in the South. But I got to give it like that Freeman factor. Like I really think that was a real thing, in this recruitment staff did a nice job. Parents clicked at Notre Dame during his official visit. So one thing that was interesting about Moore, who's definitely a boundary corner, about 6'3", 190 pounds, he told me he was leaning Stanford after he visited Stanford. So he, ended up taking some time and ended up deciding on Notre Dame. So I think that group right there, of duo, I should say, of Moore and Bellamy is a really solid one. And then you pair that with Jaden Mickey, who's already committed, 4-star corner from California. Pretty solid group there, Patrick.
Yeah, I would say so. And I mean, that's 2 4-star DBs still in play for a third there, with Benjamin Morrison still out on the board. I imagine that you'll want to touch on him a little bit later on. But yeah, when you look at Moore in particular, at least I think between the cultural fit of, all right, this kid's deciding between Notre Dame and Stanford, you would have to imagine that, you know, looking at it that way, it's not going to be some kind of thing where he's shocked or can't handle the academic and off-field side of Notre Dame. And then just at boundary corner, that's been a position where Notre Dame's going to have 3 boundary starters in 3 years, when you include this year, 2019 or 2021, going back to 2019. And a position that's been not exactly the best recruited, I would say, until last cycle. So getting another one of those guys in there, there's someone like Devin Moore in there, I think is a really big deal, especially after you got someone like a Chance Tucker with his fluidity, and Philip Riley, wherever he could end up. I think you have to like where that position is going in particular. We see a
Yeah,
lot of you guys' questions coming in here on the chat. We will get to your questions a little bit later on in the show, but if you want to have us touch on them right away, or make sure we get to them in the chat, leave us a super chat. We are easily bought, and we'll be sure to get to whatever you want to ask us.
very easily bought. Yeah. And then you get to hear the DJ air horn, and that's what the people come here to see. The recruiting information is one thing, but I mean, come on, DJ air horn, that's really what the people want. So
I mean, it's what I come here for, what I do these live shows for. Nothing gets your juices going like that.
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, corners. Final thoughts there, Mike, or do you want to move on?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure we'll get questions about Benjamin Morrison, but yeah, this is definitely one that has been interesting. I put in a future cast pick in for him to land at Notre Dame. I can't remember if it was May or early June, but did that, and then I flipped it to Washington on Friday night or Saturday morning, hearing that he was looking likely to the Huskies. And then I flipped it back to Notre Dame. I really, really hate changing picks. Like, I don't like to throw in projection picks. I will do it sometimes, maybe against my better judgment, but I I really thought he was going to Notre Dame, and then I really thought he was going to Washington, and now I really think he's going to Notre Dame again. So I put my pick back on the Fighting Irish, and looks like Lars Hansen, the Washington Rivals publisher, did this evening, just about a couple hours before we started recording. So I think that kind of gives you an indication where things might be going with Benjamin Morrison. But again, that's what I thought a couple weeks ago. That's what I thought 2 days ago when Lars and I also had picks in for Washington. So if Notre Dame does pull this one off, I mean, that's a really darn good defensive back class. Then the question becomes, is there a 5th DB? If so, it's got to be a safety. Is that a Jake Pope? Is that Xavier Nwankpa? Because you got Mickey, Bellamy, Moore, Morrison in that case, all listed as cornerbacks. I think Bellamy ends up playing corner at Notre Dame. Moore could. Morrison even has that versatility. So we talked about this a lot last cycle, right, Patrick? Go get cornerbacks who could move to safety, because it's hard to get a safety that can move to corner. So that one, so I'm okay with that but Notre Dame definitely, in my opinion, needs a safety to come out of this group for numbers and keeping that group balanced. But overall, I mean, I really liked last year's defensive back class, Patrick. but I would argue that the floor is higher with this one. And let me explain why. I think Ryan Barnes, Philip Riley, and Kari G are all very good players. JoJo Johnson, like these are really good prospects with high ceilings that Notre Dame signed in the last cycle, but I feel like there's some bust potential there. Like with a lot of them, I'm not sure what the position is. Whereas with Devin Moore and Bellamy, I'm like, I know what these guys are. Like personally, this is just my opinion. I feel like I have a good idea of what these prospects are right now and will translate to. But like, is Ryan Barnes like? Does he have that short area quickness and just fluidity as a cover corner to be a boundary corner? Is Kari G a rover? Like when I saw Philip Riley last September, what was I saying, Patrick? I think he might end up being like, don't call me crazy, but I think it might be in a rover. Like that's what I said because that dude was just so jacked. So I feel like with some of those guys, and that was a six-man DB class, Chance Tucker you mentioned, that's the one I feel most confident about right now. This is just one man's opinion. So that's kind of my rambles there.
I mean, I'll sign up and back you up on Chance Tucker. You're talking to the president of the fan club right here. So
Yeah, was that you?
that's me.
Okay.
I appointed myself to that role a little while ago, and no one has tried to knock me from it, to my
Well,
knowledge.
your VP can be his dad Byron. I think
Yes.
that's a good VP. I still haven't found one for the Joe Alt fan club. I think it's just me. I'm the president, vice president.
You don't need anybody else. You do a good enough job promoting that one on your own.
Yeah, but so that's kind of my spiel on the DBs. I like I mean the floor for both is really high in my opinion. This is assuming Notre Dame gets Benjamin Morrison. I think the floor is pretty high for both. Excuse me, the ceiling. I'm sorry, ceiling's really high for both. But to me, I just feel like less chance for a bust. In the 2022 class. And I know that me coming on here and saying that some recruits that Notre Dame signs might not work out probably offends some people, but I mean, how many transfer out has Notre Dame had? Like, it just happens. Like, Notre Dame is going to sign big classes, and guys are going to transfer out, and especially with the one-time transfer rule and the transfer portal so busy, like, this is just the reality of college football.
Yeah, and to go back to a loose emojiism, if you look at a class, generally it's going to break down into thirds.
Oh
A
my
third of
God.
guys who are drafted, a third of guys who are solid starters or backups, and a third of guys who end up as deep reserves or end up transferring out. Usually just kind of how it goes. But yes, in that class,
That's a
Notre Dame.
fantastic Lewism. That's amazing. I remember he wrote articles. He did his loose
You
confession
did?
column and it was like his rule of thirds. That is gold right there. Nice job.
Well, Notre Dame beat out Penn State for Jaden Bellamy. Notre Dame did not beat out Penn State for Nicholas Singleton, the four-star running back from Pennsylvania who announced a commitment to Penn State about an hour before we started recording this. Mike, or I don't remember if you have put a future cast in it on this one, but a tough one for Notre Dame here. And his commitment to the Nittany Lions means that of the big three back targets that we talked about so many times on here, Notre Dame has ended up with 0 of them. But they were interested in taking a second back because any of those 3 guys that they committed would have joined Jadarian Price. Do you still see that as happening? Who might be some names to watch there? Kind of what's next here at running back after Singleton is headed to Penn State?
Yeah, so you mentioned that the future cast. I didn't put one in. This was one that even when other folks were putting them in for Notre Dame, I just didn't see it. Like I don't know who they were talking to, but my contacts were like, "Hey, Notre Dame did a really nice job during his official visit. He nearly committed. These are truths from what I'm told, but it was not done." I really felt like if Singleton left Notre Dame without a silent commitment, I didn't feel great about it because he's now going to go to Texas A&M. That visit high for Notre Dame will wear off, and then he's going to go to Alabama. Not that I felt those two schools were actually going to make a dent in their recruitment because, I mean, several months ago I was told that Alabama's just not going to be a factor in this recruitment. It's just, not what he is looking for. But, hey, took a visit there. I would take an official visit to Alabama. Why the heck wouldn't you? So that kind of wore off. I think Penn State kind of caught on that, all right, Notre Dame definitely made a move here. We need to go into what I'm calling recovery mode. Like, hey, we need to, move into our next phase of recruiting him if we think he's leaning towards Notre Dame. So this is a loss. They lost Gavin Sawchuk to Oklahoma. They lost Dallin Hayden to Ohio State. Notre Dame finished second for the Big Three. We had a comment early in our YouTube live chat. Actually, just let me pull it up. No, that wasn't it. JoJo says, Singer, you were right in regards. We were going to strike out on all the Big Three backs we were on. Oh, well, I'm great with JD. We'll touch on JD Price in a second. I actually did not. That was not right on that, JoJo. I actually thought that Notre Dame was going to get one of the Big Three backs. I actually wrote an article predicting June recruiting, and I felt that Notre Dame would get one of the three. Maybe just based on probability. They're in the top 2 for 3 guys. The chances seem good that they would at least just get one of them. And they finished second for all of them, and those were the schools that if you would have told me Notre Dame's not going to win those 3 recruitments, but where do you think they'll go? This was the result I would have guessed. Still stings for Notre Dame. I think Singleton was the top guy that they were really after among that Big Three. Just his combination of size, speed, power. A guy that Lance Taylor really wanted in this class. Again, he would have taken any of the 3. But Notre Dame does have Jadarian Price, and this is a darn good back. And this is a guy I hear that Notre Dame is more excited about every day since he committed back on February 21st. So Jadarian Price, 5'11", 175 pounds, someone I've seen in person. Fantastic kid. Really good football player from Denison, Texas, up in Texoma. So this is a darn good football player. So folks who are upset about running back recruiting right now, look, Kyron Williams, 2019 class, absolute baller. He's in the top 10 early odds for the Heisman Trophy contention early on. 2020 class, Chris Tyree, absolute baller. 2021, I don't know whether they would have signed Kamar Wheaton or some 2-star. I would be saying I don't know about the 2021 guys. We haven't seen him play any college football. But Audric Estime, New Jersey Player of the Year per multiple outlets. Logan Diggs, Louisiana 5A Offensive Player of the Year. Darn good prospects. And then Jadarian Price, a 4-star guy, has been productive at the high school career when he's not healthy. So, I don't know. I think, look, I'm not trying to say that not getting one of the Big Three was not a big deal, but because it's a loss. But I mean, I think you can make an argument that was more of a cherry on top of what has already been really strong running back recruiting. And just saw this comment from Michael Scheller that Taylor didn't land Tyree. Chip Long definitely had a big deal in landing Chris Tyree. But I've seen people saying that Lance Taylor didn't get Tyree. This is false. Lance Taylor was really important in the Chris Tyree recruitment. Chip Long was as well. But, Taylor, I'll just say Taylor was really important in that recruitment. So just folks, Notre Dame fans, I'm going to challenge you. Don't poo-poo on Notre Dame recruiting in just this week. If things aren't happening great in this one week or this one day, oh my God, my house is on fire. It's okay. Take a deep breath, calm down. Things are going to be okay. Is Notre Dame going to beat Alabama if they play in the national championship game this season? I don't know. Alabama's freaking Alabama. They're going to be really hard to beat right now. I think Notre Dame is. I'm not trying to go on too much of a tangent, Patrick. You haven't talked in 5 minutes. I'm just rambling, but I just feel I don't know. Maybe I should be every single player needs to be a 5-star to close the gap on Alabama, and that's the only thing that matters. I guess at the end of the day, that's important, but I mean Alabama it's not like the coaching staff at Notre Dame is hey, let's try to outsmart everybody and take 3-star guys and make them good. We don't want the best players. Let's take the development. They're trying to do this. It's just Alabama's pretty darn good right now. Ohio State, pretty darn good. Clemson, Notre Dame even split with them last year. Like those schools are really good too. Notre Dame is elite. Like it's a tier 2 school in the country right now. It's not like the offensive staff is stupid and doesn't know what they're doing. It's just these other schools are really darn good too. They're you can't just walk over these other schools that are up there. All right, I'm done. I don't know if any of that made sense, but sometimes I don't get it. And when I guess I'm not done. When everyone's praising Marcus Freeman, this is the best coach ever. We need to make him head coach in waiting right now. Let's just fire Kelly and bring in Marcus Freeman as head coach. I'm like, calm down. For both of the sides, the Sunshine Pumpers, Marcus Freeman is the best thing literally ever. He's never even coached a snap at Notre Dame though. Or everything is my house is burning down. Like, calm down on both sides, folks. That's it.
All right, I'll take the floor here for a minute, just so you can put on an oxygen mask and I don't know. I don't want to say take a lap, but
I don't think any of that made sense. So,
all right. Well, anyway, I know we've talked about here before versus like needs versus wants, and where the big three backs fell in that need when you look at who's on the roster, Jadarian Price, and a couple of other options that I imagine you'll touch on here. Probably not at the top of the need list in this class, but they were absolutely one of those. Now they went 0 for 3 on that. That's a tough situation. And I think you can look at that being true at the same time as if you wanted hopes for, say, a top 5 class. Landing one of them probably would have been close to a must for that. We'll see, but that really would have helped that case. And of course, not to say that. All right, I think the floor is still high there, but that one's a dent in the ceiling. And yeah, if you wanted to say top 5 class, or think about it, or just think about closing the gap, as we all hear so much, landing one or two of these guys that have went elsewhere in the last month or a couple weeks, yeah, you probably want to do that. So yeah, I don't think the sky is falling, because especially this is a longer game, and there's some offensive targets that are still out there that, Mike, I know you feel good about in terms of their chances to end up at Notre Dame. But yeah, and there was a stretch last year where offensive recruiting was looking a little, it doesn't look too great. And then obviously they finished up okay. But yeah, you can still look at it in that regard and think, yeah, if you think about top 5 classes or gap closings or all of those things, would have been nice to add one to two of those guys. But anyway, why don't we touch on who's next at running back, if in fact you see anybody there? So names to know that might be a number 2. Who do you got?
Yeah, we're getting comments in the YouTube chat now about Penn State basically being, over and better than Notre Dame in offensive recruiting. Like, are you serious? Like, this is what I'm talking about. Like, we can't overreact to one recruitment. And then Drew Sultan, Caden Saunders, yes, those were guys that Notre Dame wanted. But, I mean, do we want to pull through the 2021 class and like, just go through all of this? Like, I don't know. I guess Penn State hasn't offered a Morion Walker yet, but Alabama and LSU have. Penn State offered Steve Angeli really early, so Notre Dame beat out Penn State.
Was once committed there. Yeah.
So, anyways, sorry guys. I love you guys, but
Holden Staves was once committed to Penn State. So yeah, there's that.
No, you're not allowed to say that.
Anyway, second running back in the class.
Second running back.
Who are you looking at?
Guys, I love you, by the way, in the comment section, but to me, I don't like to overreact either way. Like, second running back potentially here. This part is not sourced in terms of who I think they can move on next. Think Quinshon Judkins, someone they offered. I believe Lance Taylor's kind of kept them warm. Like they talk. Judkins has always been playing the long game. I remember when Notre Dame offered Judkins, and the thought was they must be offering him because they're losing out with the big 3. Well, that wasn't the reason, but they did lose out on the big 3. So then you have already been recruiting Judkins for 3 or 4 months. So it was kind of good planning ahead. by Notre Dame. But we'll see if Notre Dame likes Judkins enough to really move on him. I think Jabran Payne, someone who I honestly have not heard much about in quite some time. Um, you know, it's not. I mean, he had big time offers. I think some of those might have kind of faded away. So this could be someone that Notre Dame decides to move on. And then there's the option of just sticking with Jadarian Price. I mean, he is a darn good back in his own right. If Notre Dame feels it's good with its numbers and doesn't need to go take a second running back, then I can just see that happening. Just sticking with Price, and then maybe go get two in the 2023 class. Who knows? Maybe there's a great transfer that pops up for Notre Dame in the offseason. So, yeah, basically what I am told that his source is Notre Dame is not going to take a running back just to take a running back and to have another body in that room. They are, going to be picky and going to take someone that they like.
All right, let's touch on one other position on offense here in light of another decision last week from a target headed elsewhere, and that's wide receiver Nicholas Anderson, three-star receiver out of Katy, Texas, outside Houston, committed to Oregon last week in what I know for you and seeing for most people who cover this was a bit of a surprise coming off a visit to Notre Dame earlier in June. Uh, Mike, what do you kind of see, as far as all right, how that one went down, or kind of what you
Shock.
think is a surprise
Shock.
and kind of where Notre Dame goes next year.
Shock. I mean, it should never be a shock in recruiting. That's why I never like to say a kid's a lock to a school. I mean, you just don't know what could happen. I mean, there were a lot of recruits Notre Dame looked good for in the 2021 class. Pandemic happens. Like, you just can't predict recruiting. So I felt like I learned a lesson on Nick Anderson. Like, my sources at the Notre Dame side of things felt really good about where Notre Dame was at following that visit. And then he abruptly commits to Oregon. Notre Dame, to my knowledge, found out about Anderson's commitment to Oregon like 2 hours before he announced it. I don't even think he was planning on telling Notre Dame. Notre Dame kind of caught wind of it. So, yeah, again, you just don't know. This was definitely a loss for Notre Dame. They wanted him in this class. Dell Alexander went after him hard. So it was just a loss to Oregon, and one that the Notre Dame staff was kind of blindsided by. But moving forward, there are some big names on that receiver board, and Notre Dame is looking good for a few of them. Tobias Merriweather. I really think Notre Dame's the favorite here. They have to close, though. Stanford, Oregon, I don't. I have a hard time reading Tobias Merriweather, but from what I gather, I think he's leaning Notre Dame. I know Michigan's kind of making a late run. I don't see the Wolverines competing with Notre Dame in this specific recruitment. I like where Notre Dame's at, but Tobias Merriweather, I'm told, is just a hard kid to read and predict. So we will see on Tobias Merriweather, but right now I really like where Notre Dame's at there. CJ Williams is the guy on the board, regardless of position, that Notre Dame needs to get to say yes. He's close. If he stretches his recruitment into the fall and it's not ready in August, then what happens? Does that visit high? He had such a great visit at the end of June. Does that kind of wear off? And now he's thinking about other schools. If Williams takes his recruitment into the fall, I think Notre Dame needs to get him on campus for a game, which is tough out, from Los Angeles when he's playing his own games. But I do believe he will announce in August. At least that's what he's indicated to me. I mean, he was supposed to announce a top 5 over the weekend. He didn't. I mean, so we'll just have to see. But if Notre Dame can get C.J. Williams and Tobias Merriweather and holds on to Marion Walker, they don't need, in my opinion, they don't need to take 4. If they get those 3 and call it a day, I mean, I'm excited to see who's the new blame when it comes to Notre Dame recruiting, because that would be one heck of a receiver class. C.J. Williams, borderline 5-star player, one of the safest prospects in the entire 2022 class. Pretty high ceiling, but the floor is incredible there. The fit at Notre Dame would be incredible. Tobias Merriweather scratching the surface with how good he can be. I would absolutely love that pair. And then a couple other guys I think are at least worth mentioning. Elick Aomaner. I think he's leaning Stanford. Had an article at him at blueandgold.com today. Someone to keep an eye on, potentially maybe tucks things over with his family and they decide on Notre Dame. But right now I think it's Stanford. And yes, Xavier Bradshaw, he's still on the board, still communicating with Notre Dame. The Irish staff wanted him to visit that last weekend of June. He was on a family vacation and wasn't able to work it out. So still someone to keep an eye on into the fall. So that's kind of receiver recruiting right now. I know Andre Green is hoping to officially visit in October 1st for the Cincinnati game. There's Joseph Griffin, the Boston College commit. There's some other guys, but those are the four main targets I would identify right now to know, unless there's someone I'm forgetting about. And then Amarion Walker. If I'm a Notre Dame coach, I'm still treating him like he's an uncommitted guy. With him landing Alabama and LSU, so you want to recruit him like he's an uncommitted guy.
Yeah, the only thought I have on that is I'd be really surprised if the class is just 3 players, or at least the newcomer receiver class is 3 players, whether that's 3 plus a transfer or 2 or 4 plus a transfer. I don't know. Just because you have one scholarship guy currently on the team from the 2019 and 2020 classes, and when you look at that 2018 group, I mean, I don't know how many of those guys are right now you can really predict that are going to come back for that 5th season next year. So just from a numbers standpoint, I feel like you want this one, and if you're looking at it from an ideal standpoint, to be 4 guys at a minimum.
In that case, I'd rather have 3 in a grad transfer, like someone who can help out now. Because if we're talking about the 2022 season is the concern for, why you want to take 4 or even the 23 season. I mean, I don't know how much the 2022 recruiting class is going to help you right away. So point taken, but I would maybe it's 4 in a receiver grad transfer. Maybe they can somehow sneak in a grad transfer receiver for this season. I doubt it. But I know Notre Dame's always looking at that transfer portal, but I'm not sure how that would work with summer school starting up already. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not an academic wizard when it comes to Notre Dame, but again, I've heard that Notre Dame is still looking at that transfer portal.
Yeah, if it's only 3 guys that they end up signing, I would be really surprised if a transfer is not in or coming in on campus in addition to that. Just again, I'm thinking only from a numbers standpoint here. But all right, so that covers most of these recent decisions here, I think. Do you want to get to some questions? I know
I do.
Hot and heavy in the chat here.
I know I've probably yelled at enough of them. Yeah, so we'll get into questions. And if you want to guarantee, we're going to kind of scroll through and pick our favorite. But if you want to guarantee your question get answered, just drop a super chat so you can hear that DJ air horn.
Justin Hunter asks, who's most likely to commit to Notre Dame next?
I would probably say Jalen Sneed. A guy who I feel like is going to be a 5-star linebacker. He absolutely dominated the Atlanta Rivals the Atlanta Rivals camp, and then a couple months later, 5-star challenge back in Atlanta. I didn't even think he had his strongest performance. This was my 4th time seeing him in person, and he still won linebacker MVP over 2 Ohio State 5-star linebacker commits, Gabe Powers, CJ Hicks. And then there's a 5-star linebacker from Virginia there, too. I forget his name. Sean Murphy. Sneed won the MVP. So, I mean, the superstar right there, in my opinion. My sources on the Notre Dame side of things feel like Jalen Sneed is like the second coming of Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa. Really high praises. Someone who probably... I love when I say something and then I just get the big eyes from Patrick. That's my favorite. But yeah, I'm serious. Like, Wusu Kormo probably would have been a 1st-round pick if it weren't for those kind of late medical things that popped up, right? So that would be high praises for Sneed, or it is high praises for Sneed. But and maybe even a 5-star linebacker. That'd be 3 straight cycles, with Notre Dame having a 4-star commitment that's bumped up to a 5-star. That's a fun tidbit for me. So yeah, I think Notre Dame is in a really favorable position with Jalen Sneed. I guess some Oregon folks are trying to make some buzz there late, but I don't see it. And I anticipate Jalen Sneed being on Notre Dame's commitment list if all I'm being told is correct, and nothing changes. I expect that to happen maybe in the next week or two. So that would, yeah, that'd be a monster.
I
Um,
see one in there is Jalen Sneed a silent commit. Well, if we said yes, then he wouldn't be a silent commit anymore, would he? But yeah, that's
I can't. I've already made myself look like a big enough arse earlier, so I'm not gonna go on a silent commit tangent. So
well. I'll just say this: I wish that term didn't exist. But uh,
it's just a made up term we have. I mean,
it's tiresome. But okay. I want to see Patrick Engel and Mike Goolsby arm wrestle. I mean, if you want to see me get destroyed in about 2 seconds, then yes, you would. But no, I have complete faith that he would absolutely destroy me in arm wrestling.
here's a interesting comment from Chris. I'll pose this one to you, Patrick. Notre Dame has done rather well recruiting receivers with the current position coach and rest of staff, but development coaching has been questionable. What do you think?
This is always a fun topic, isn't it?
I mean, who do you say Dell got here in what, 2017?
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
you credit him with Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool? Like he didn't
yeah. I
recruit
mean,
those guys. He'll develop them.
I think there's absolutely something to that. I mean, I think a lot of that sentiment comes from guys maybe not getting on the field early, doing much per se, and I don't know that that's fully wrong, but nor do I know that it's fully like okay, this is true because even in the last 4 years, there have been guys who've gotten on the field as freshmen. The total impact of them doesn't add to say, what it might be at some others or other places or what have you. Uh, but I I understand it in the sense. All right, you look at this 2018 receiver class where a this was a really highly regarded and big group of 5 guys, and here we are in their senior year and kind of waiting for them to still do something, and that's for various reasons. I mean, obviously Braden Lindsey was banged up all of last year. Kevin Austin, same kind of situation, and then the year before being the unofficial suspension per se, and then I think that would be that they still have obviously this year to try to right that, and all those guys have a lot of opportunity. I mean, we could be sitting here in the end of December and thinking, all right, yeah, Kevin Austin's a day 2 pick or something. We'll see, but I don't I don't know that I fully agree, but at least I understand where this is where it's coming from, and just in that last year you kind of had to cover for it where you were they spent the last couple of years relying on like needing a senior year breakout or needing a grad transfer and whatnot. And you'd probably like to have more options than that. But I don't think it's been a disaster like it.
Yeah.
Some discussions have the tone of thinking that it's a disaster. But I get the sentiment. I don't want to dismiss it as being completely stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. To me, the one position Notre Dame has not been good enough at, it's not receiver, it's not corner, it's quarterback. Ian Book was amazing at Notre Dame, but to win a national championship today, I mean, I went on my rant earlier about how great Alabama and Clemson is. Ohio State gets lumped into that too. I mean, they've won one championship. I mean, they won in 2014. When was the last time they won one before? It was like 20 years ago or something.
2002,
Yeah,
one of
around.
those over Miami. I forget what
Yeah, that's
exactly
right. I
it
think
was.
it's 2001, 2000. I don't know. We're too young for this. But those, I mean, you look at the quarterbacks those schools have had: Tua, Jalen Hurts, Trevor Lawrence. Now Clemson's got DJ Uiagalelei. So, I mean, receiver and corner are really important for Notre Dame. But to me, to win a national championship, I mean, look at LSU, Joe Burrow. I think you have to have one of those level quarterbacks. I think Ian Book was really, really good for Notre Dame. Like, just, I mean, obviously, I mean, he's the all-time, most winning quarterback at Notre Dame. But I think you just need a first-round pick, that kind of player out there.
If you want to win in the playoff and win a national title, you pretty much need to have a first round pick at this point.
Yeah,
But I think it's true in that Ian Book was really good, and Notre Dame probably needs an upgrade from what he was if it wants to do that. But then again, if it's get that and it's fixed, I don't agree with that notion either, or that put Trevor Lawrence on last year's Notre Dame team and they're winning the national title. I'm not sure I can go there, and because the receivers were what they were, and I think you saw that kind of I hate to use the word gap, but it was what it was. Uh, Corner, I think was kind of
wait, you think if Trevor Lawrence
admirable.
was Notre Dame's quarterback, they still don't win it?
No, it's I know it's the most important position, but it's still one of you know one one of 21 other guys on the field.
I don't
So
know. That's interesting. I never thought about that. I think they could have made it really interesting with Bama. I mean, they only lost by
oh
7.
sure,
That's it.
and I don't think it would be a put him on Notre Dame and the exact same score of the Alabama game holds. No, but I don't know that that was the only difference or enough of a difference to mitigate everything else. I mean, we saw corner was admirably put together from what they had, but still just a fine position. Receiver again, you saw the difference between what Notre Dame had last year and some of these other receiving cores of playoff teams and whatnot. So I don't know. I can't forget that we didn't see that either. I guess is what I'm
Yeah,
trying to say.
yeah. I mean, look, I think the receiver position was just down for Notre Dame last year, but before that, I mean, Claypool and Boykin. You look at there were some really good receivers at Notre Dame in the Brian Kelly era. Just last year just was down. And Kevin Austin, that could have been his coming out party, to be that next, to follow in that line. Just didn't happen. So all right, back to the questions.
Yes. Coleman Smith asks, if you were to guess, who will be the next offensive commit in 2022?
Hmm. I might say Billy Schrauth. Look, Notre Dame is going to be taking more guys on defense than offense. They've already got their quarterback. They might be done at running back. They're done at tight end. They have one, maybe two offensive linemen left. And then, receivers is the big position left. But when I think about the receivers, unless something changes, there's no one to me that is going to pop super soon. Schrauth is kind of one of those, been waiting for about a year now for him to, and that might finally come. So I'm going to say Billy Schrauth.
Super chat?
We do.
All right.
We got one from Rick. We really appreciate it, man.
And he asks, newbie here, Notre Dame has offered 2023 defensive tackles. Any initial interest?
I want to say there's more than two. If you're just looking
I
on the
think so
rival,
too.
yeah, if you're looking on the rivals offer list, some of those guys might be defensive ends listed wise, but Luke Montgomery is an interior guy. Jason Moore likely an interior guy. I know there's another one, a big name. But yes, so Notre Dame has their commitments at the defensive end spot. Viper with Keon Keeley, strong side end. Big end, as it's called now, Rick. Brennan Vernon. I think defensive tackle is certainly something to keep an eye on now. Kendrick Gilbert, I want to say, is probably even an interior guy. Notre Dame offered him after Irish Invasion. So if the next commitment on the defensive line in 2023, I feel like Notre Dame would want it to be an interior player. Definitely some interest. Keep an eye on the end of the month. That's going to be, so the last week of July, it goes from dead to open period in recruiting. I think some 2023 defensive tackles will be on campus that weekend. So I would definitely keep an eye on there. So hope that answers your question, Rick. And gonna look through some more questions. And we got another one. The same guy who asked if you would be go to be in an arm wrestle.
Is there any news with Anthony Lucas? Talking.
News, yeah. If you're gonna ask me news, no, he hasn't trimmed down a list. He hasn't made a commitment. Notre Dame's still working on him. They will have a spot for him no matter what. Steph absolutely loves him. I'm told he and his family really lit up every room they walked in when they were on campus for their official visit in June. Um, Notre Dame's just going to play the long game. As long as Lucas wants to take this, they will be on the ride with him. Some of the other schools involved, I think he visited like a half dozen schools in June. Alabama, his dad went to Miami. Oregon, I think he visited. There's a lot of other schools. I want to say LSU he visited. There's a lot of schools involved. Notre Dame's going to have to beat out some heavy hitters there.
Next up, we have, is Jake Pope still leaning Notre Dame, or with the commitment of Devin Moore, do you think he is looking elsewhere?
Um, I'm not sure if the Devin Moore commitment directly impacted whether or not Jake Pope would want to come to Notre Dame, or if Notre Dame still wanted to take Jake Pope. But I don't see. I never really thought that Jake Pope was going to end up at Notre Dame. Um, Maybe at times, maybe, but I just didn't see it. I've always felt like he was North Carolina. My guess right now is that's where he ends up. If it's not North Carolina, if Georgia has really pushed in the past month for Jake Pope, that in-state powerhouse, hard to see him turning down Georgia. But that's my guess right now. Could Notre Dame still pull off the Jake Pope recruitment? Hey, if they're gonna pull off Benjamin Morrison, they can easily pull off Jake Pope. So I mean, the Pope and Notre Dame, that's just two peas in a pod, right? So, but I do think that he is looking elsewhere. So
Michael Scheller asked again, when will Tobias Merriweather decide? That's my concern. The sooner the better.
yeah, absolutely. I think the sooner the better. If you're leading for a guy, you'd want him to decide sooner than later, because the longer things drag out, just the more things that could happen. I don't think he has a decision date. From what I'm told, he wants to visit maybe a local school or two in the Pacific Northwest in late July during that last week, where kids can take visits again. Before August. I believe August is dead again. I haven't seen the 2022 recruiting calendar yet, but that is my anticipation. So I would probably guess sometime in August. That would be, my guess right now. So going back to Patrick to the Penn State thing, Chris with a comment says Irish breakdown. Brian Driscoll, former colleague, great guy. Said that's where he's formulating opinion. Losing players to the big three, Michigan and Oklahoma. I don't know. Michigan was in the big three, or they're in that category. So losing a recruit to Michigan is understandable, but Penn State is not, because the momentum of the two programs are going in separate direction. I would assume that last word was supposed to be. I guess, but I mean, if you're an in-state kid, like if you're a Pennsylvania kid and there's that poll to go to Penn State, like I don't think that's a detriment on the Notre Dame staff that they weren't able to get Nicholas Singleton out of Pennsylvania. I mean, the staff did everything they could. I really do think they did everything they could, and they might still keep recruiting Nicholas Singleton. That's something we haven't talked about yet. I still think they might continue to recruit him unless Nick is like, hey, kick rocks. I'm never going to be interested in you, and I think it's going to be really tough to flip him. Penn State might have a disastrous season, and that might kind of help expedite that. But, like, if Blake Fisher, if you're Michigan, right? Blake Fisher nearly committed to Michigan. That's what he had said before. If you're a Michigan fan, he commits to Notre Dame. It's like, I mean, that's tough to go into Notre Dame's backyard and beat the Fighting Irish for an indie kid. I mean, like, you fought, you didn't win, you move on to the next one or keep going after them and try to flip them. But I don't. I mean, sure, if you look at it from like 10,000 feet, I get it. But I wouldn't say that, that Michigan is trending in a direction that Penn State isn't, right? I mean, I think, excuse me, it's probably flipped. I think Penn State might be trending up and Michigan down, if anything. So that's kind of my thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is that I think it's plausible, certainly, that whatever Penn State was last year in its messy season is what Notre Dame was in 2016. They've recruited well enough, and I think Franklin's a good enough coach uh, for that to be something we look back on in 4 years and be a 1 year blip. But that's neither really here nor there. But overall, I guess to the point of like that I don't know that it's a complete disaster to lose a kid from Pennsylvania to Penn State. I mean, my read on this one, even though, yes, it might be disappointing that Notre Dame didn't do it or land any of its big three running back targets or some of its offensive targets. Sometimes I think a kid just kind of, you know, picks somewhere else other than Notre Dame. But anyway, we get to another question here. Dr. Irish. Bama wins without superstar QBs, but their offensive line and defensive line both dominated. Notre Dame is good, but doesn't dominate like it used to. Your take, Mike or Patrick? I guess I'll start here. I don't know that I'd say Bama wins without superstar QBs, considering they had Tua Tagovailoa. And sure, I think Mac Jones was helped out a lot by the situation around him, but which kind of goes to my point a little bit of how important it is to have really good receivers and I guess offensive linemen here. I don't know. I thought Notre Dame's offensive line, yeah, I think it was pretty dominant, or at least I find it hard to poke holes in compared to any other spot on the roster. So, and then the defensive line, like if anything, what we saw in the spring game, which I know was kind of favorable toward defense, is it all like we see during the season? Yeah, I'm not worried about that one at all.
I would my point here is that college football's changed in the past 7 or 8 years when Alabama just trotted out um, John McCarron, AJ McCarron, yeah,
Yes.
AJ McCarron. Like it's different, Like Nick Saban's not playing. Let's run the ball and play great defense. He's now running spreads and throwing the ball 50 times. Like so that I would say that Bama now is winning with superstar quarterbacks. Mac Jones, first round pick, number 15 overall. I think you can argue that's a superstar QB. Yes, their O line and D line both dominated, but I mean Notre Dame's offensive line was second in the Joe Moore Award, so I mean, definitely we're pretty dominant as well.
Next question here, Mike. How large is the gap between offensive and defensive recruiting? Here's a good one.
Yeah, yeah. So what we're 53 minutes in. We might have to end on this one unless anyone just got any zinger questions or super chats coming in. I go back to I am not the overreaction guy. Maybe I'm overreacting to not overreacting. I don't know. But man, Patrick, I thought that would get a smile out of you or something. I thought that was a good one. I don't think it's as I think right now it seems big because of and you recruit Knicks who follow this stuff like I do. Like you're seeing Notre Dame's last 4 commitments all be defensive guys. Probably 6 out of the last 8 defense. Like it's trending that way. I don't think you can make an argument that the offensive class. I mean, I guess you could make the argument, but because you don't know, right? Steve Angeli and Jadarian Price could be Heisman finalists. Like you don't know, and then the offensive class is much better than the defensive class. But I think reasonably, with some confidence, you can say that the defensive class is better, right? I mean, star power everywhere. It's also a bigger class that kind of takes into account. But you got to think Angeli, Price, Merriweather, Chan, Tanona, all committed really early to Notre Dame, right? All of those guys before April, right? I mean, I think of those, I just said Walker was the most recent on March 10th. And then you have the two tight ends, exciting, but I think those probably get written off because they're tight ends, and of course Notre Dame's going to land tight ends. So I think there's a ton of excitement with Marcus Freeman. He's doing an incredible job. Don't want to belittle that at all because I love what Marcus Freeman's been doing. I'm on I'm the conductor of that train. I've been saying that I think a week after he got the job at Notre Dame. So I'm all on that hype train, but I don't think it's that big of a gap. Like I just don't. So I don't have like some kind of quantifiable answer for you, who asked this question. But to me, when you look through each position on offense, Steve Angeli, very first quarterback they offered, Under Armour All-American, 4-star player, had offers from Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. A lot of these schools, really nice get. J.D. Price. Wasn't in that big three, but Notre Dame, you got to think, back in like January, Notre Dame felt like they could possibly get two of the big three. So taking Price meant you can't get two of the big three. Now you can only get one. That's how much they liked Price. And part of that's, a bird in the hand, but also they really liked Price. And again, I'm told they like him even more. They go to receiver, Amorion Walker, Under Armour All-American, LSU, Alabama, Michigan, Florida State, all these offers now. Maybe some of those are at DB. Doesn't really matter. It's the 4-4-1 that's really catching people's attention is overall athleticism. And then if you go get Tobias Smith-Ware and CJ Williams, really nice. Holden Stays, 4-star, former Penn State commit, Polynesian Bowl commit, Eli Raridan. Everyone I talk to who meets that kid in person is just stunned. I mean, the dude is just a monster. If he is not careful, Jeff Quinn might kidnap him for that offensive line room. And then you look at the offensive line, Ty Chan, Joey Tanona, both All-Americans, both 4-star players, both inside the Rivals 250, both had elite offers. So, like, I'm going through all these guys, and it's like these accolades for these kids are all really incredible. And then what? Maybe the one is Ashton Craig, who had Michigan and Iowa and Northwestern, and Notre Dame actually saw him in person to evaluate him and loved them. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like, when you go through and actually look at all these positions on offense, maybe they are not so bad.
Super chat from CW Pura. Thank you. Thanks, guys, for all the hard work. Getting excited about this season. Go Irish. Well, thank you. And if you had a question, feel free to squeeze it in there. But yeah. Thanks again for the super chat.
Thank you, C-Dubs. Appreciate you, man. It's always been a great support of our show. But all right, well, I think that was a pretty good live show, right around our target mark of an hour. I know Patrick likes to say just a little under an hour. So I'm kind of pushing my limits here, but
yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks again, everybody who tuned in live for tuning in. Thanks for everyone who dropped us a super chat, who asked us a question, who engaged with us. Really appreciate it. And of course, if you're watching back on YouTube later, or you're listening to us on the podcast format, we appreciate you doing that also. And if you'd subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit that thumbs up button, or leave us a rating and leave us a review. That'd be really great. Follow us on Twitter at Patrick Engel _. That's me. Mike is at Rivals_Singer. We will talk to you again soon, and what I'm sure will still be an interesting finish to July in Notre Dame recruiting. Until then, take care.